I don't usually tell stories like this. Maybe that's why I've chosen to keep myself anonymous. There's something intoxicating about letting the words slip out, knowing no one can trace them back to me. It's safer this way, safer for her too, because she's the kind of woman who can ruin you without even meaning to. And me, well, I let myself be ruined. Her name isn't important here, so I'll leave it out. What matters is what happened between us, and how it started with something so simple, just a request, just a zipper running along the length of her back. I met her at a mutual friends gathering, one of those midweek social events meant to make people feel less trapped in their routines. I didn't go to such things often. But that evening, I went. I suppose you could say fate had a hand in it. She was standing by the wine table when I first noticed her. A dress the color of midnight clung to her body in ways that made me forget whatever conversation I'd been in. Her laugh, low, a little husky, carried across the room and hooked into me like a lure. I wasn't the only one staring. Men always stared at her. She had that way about her, not just beauty, but a kind of presence that announced itself the moment she walked in. And yet she carried herself with modesty, with poise, like she didn't quite realize, or perhaps pretended not to, that she could rearrange the air in any room she entered. We ended up talking, casually at first. Introductions, small talk, the usual back and forth that masks curiosity with politeness. She told me she was married early in the conversation, almost as if to set a boundary, a warning sign I should notice. I did notice. I also noticed she didn't wear her wedding band that night. I asked her why. She laughed and said she sometimes left it at home because the band was a little too tight. I didn't press further, but the answer stayed with me. A married woman without her ring in a room full of strangers, it didn't exactly scream contentment. The night went on. Drinks flowed, conversations shifted, groups formed and dissolved. But I kept finding myself near her. It was as if the rest of the room blurred and she stayed sharp, in focus. At some point, she asked if I could help her with something. Her tone was light, but her eyes lingered on mine for half a second too long. "Would you mind zipping up the back of my dress?" she asked, her voice playful but quiet enough that only I heard. It was such a simple request. Innocent, really, or at least that's what it should have been. But nothing about the way she said it, the way she turned her back to me, was innocent. The zipper started at the small of her back and ran up to just below her neck. My fingers hesitated for a moment, hovering. I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin through the thin fabric. When I touched the zipper, it was cold metal against my fingertips, and then, slowly, I began to pull it upward. The sound of it sliding, soft, deliberate, filled the silence between us. She didn't move, except for a faint shift in her shoulders, like the contact had stirred something in her. My knuckles brushed against the bare skin of her spine as I pulled higher. Her skin was warm, impossibly soft. I pretended it was accidental, but the truth is, I could have been more careful. When I reached the top, the zipper clicked into place. But I didn't immediately step back. My hand lingered just a fraction too long, hovering near the back of her neck. She turned her head slightly, glancing at me from the corner of her eye. That look, half a smile, half a challenge, was the real beginning. "Thank you," she whispered. Her words were nothing unusual, just manners, but the way she said them carried a weight that pressed down on me. Gratitude, yes, but also invitation. From that moment, something between us shifted. We didn't need to acknowledge it aloud. It was there in the air, humming like electricity, waiting for the right storm. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I remember snippets, her laughter, the way her hand brushed my arm when she leaned close to tell me something, the way her eyes lingered on me when she thought no one was looking. I told myself it was all in my head, that she was just being friendly, maybe even a little flirtatious but nothing more. She was married, after all. But denial only works for so long. By the end of the night, I knew better. It didn't end there. A week later, I saw her again. This time, by chance, at a cafe not far from my office. Or maybe it wasn't chance. Maybe she knew I worked nearby, maybe she wanted me to see her. Either way, when she waved me over, I didn't hesitate. We talked over coffee, light conversation at first, but it wasn't long before the undertones surfaced. She asked me about my love life. I dodged the question, asked about her husband. She shrugged, changed the subject. That shrug told me everything I needed to know. There was distance there, a gap wide enough for someone like me to slip into. It was during that conversation she mentioned how lonely she felt sometimes. Not in so many words, but it was clear. She played with the rim of her coffee cup as she spoke, eyes down, as if she were confessing something dangerous. I guess marriage isn't always what people expect it to be, she said quietly. That sentence hung in the air between us. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I just let it sit there, breathing, alive. And then she looked at me. Really looked. The kind of look that peels back layers and demands honesty. I keep thinking about that night, she admitted softly. When you helped me with my dress. My chest tightened. She had thought about it too. That small, fleeting touch had stayed with her just as it had stayed with me. I wanted to say something clever, something smooth, but all I managed was a quiet, "So have I." She smiled then, a small, knowing curve of her lips. That smile told me more than words could. It was later, much later, that I came to understand how affairs begin. Not with grand gestures or declarations, but with little moments, subtle touches, words spoken in half tones. Affairs are born in the spaces between what's said and what's left unsaid. That night at the gathering, when she asked me to zip her dress, she may not have known it, but she opened a door. And I, reckless or maybe just hungry, stepped through without hesitation. Looking back, I know I could have walked away. I could have zipped the dress, smiled politely, and left it at that. But something about her, the way she carried loneliness in her bones like an invisible weight, the way she looked at me as if she were daring me to take one more step, pulled me in. I didn't walk away, and because of that, everything that followed became inevitable. That was the beginning. A zipper, a touch, a look. Innocent to anyone watching, but to us, it was a crack in the dam. And once it started, there was no stopping what would come next. I'll admit something now, I don't regret it. Not even the first step. Because in that single moment, when my fingers brushed her skin and her eyes found mine, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. And that was enough. Enough to make me forget consequences. Enough to make me want more. The truth is, I didn't just zip her dress that night. I unzipped a part of her life that had been sealed too long. And she did the same to me. I remember the night I first crossed the line with her as if it had been etched into my skin. People often say affairs just happen, as though they are accidents, as though you stumble and fall into another person's arms. That's a lie. Nothing about it is accidental. Every affair begins with choices, small, almost unnoticeable choices, that pile up until you can't ignore the weight of them anymore. With her, the choices came in whispers. A coffee here, a message late at night, a glance held too long. Each time, I told myself I was strong enough to keep it from going further. Each time, I was wrong. After the cafe meeting, our communication became regular. At first, it was excuses. She wanted to share a book recommendation, she wanted to ask about a restaurant I had mentioned. Then it was more personal. She texted late in the evening, when her husband was working late. Sometimes she'd send a picture of a glass of wine, perched on her nightstand, captioned with a simple line, "Wish I had company tonight." I knew what she meant. And I knew she was inviting me in, step by step. The night it finally happened, it was raining. One of those steady downpours that made the city look blurred, like a watercolor painting left out in the storm. She had texted me earlier in the day, asking if I could help her with something at her place. "It's just some boxes," she claimed. Something about the casual tone of the message felt rehearsed, as though the boxes were an excuse she'd been holding onto until she gathered the nerve. I didn't hesitate. I told myself I was just helping, nothing more. But deep down, I knew exactly what I was walking into. Her house was warm when I entered, the soft glow of lamps making the rain outside feel distant, unreal. She greeted me with that smile, small, slightly nervous, but charged with something more. Her husband, she mentioned casually, was away on business until the weekend. The boxes were real, stacked neatly by the hallway, light enough to move without much effort. I carried a few into another room, and she hovered nearby, her presence so close I could feel the heat radiating off her. When the last box was set down, I turned and found her standing just a little too close. Not invading my space exactly, but close enough that I could smell her perfume, floral, with a trace of vanilla. "Thank you," she said softly. The same words she had used that night at the gathering. The same tone. She hesitated for a moment, then laughed nervously. "Actually, there's something else." She gestured toward her bedroom. I followed without asking why. There, laid out across the bed, was a new dress, still with tags attached. "I bought this for an event," she explained, "but I wanted to try it on. The zipper is tricky though." Her eyes flicked to mine, and I swear there was mischief dancing in them. My chest tightened. I already knew where this was going, but I didn't stop it. I couldn't. She slipped into the bathroom, leaving the door cracked open. I caught glimpses, the shimmer of fabric sliding over her body, the outline of her form in the mirror. When she emerged, the dress clung to her like a second skin. She turned her back to me. "Would you?" she asked, her voice husky. The zipper again, the same request that had started everything. Only this time, it wasn't about convenience. This time, it was a test. I stepped closer, my fingers finding the zipper at the base of her spine. The room was silent except for the steady drum of rain outside. As I pulled the zipper upward, the back of my hand grazed her bare skin. She didn't flinch. She leaned into it. When I reached the top, I didn't let go. My hand lingered at her neck, fingers brushing the curve of it. She turned slowly, her face so close I could feel her breath against my lips. "This feels wrong," she whispered. "It does," I admitted. Neither of us moved away. It was her who closed the distance. Her lips met mine in a kiss that was hesitant at first, as though she needed to test the water before diving in. But once it began, it deepened quickly, hungrily, years of unmet needs spilling out all at once. Her hands gripped my shirt, pulling me closer. My arms found her waist, feeling the curve of her body beneath the fabric. The kiss was messy, desperate, the kind that makes you forget your own name. We broke apart only long enough to breathe, our foreheads pressed together. "We shouldn't," she murmured. "I know," I said. But I kissed her again anyway. From there, it was a blur. The rain outside grew louder, matching the rhythm of our movements. The dress she had been so eager to try on slipped to the floor in a whisper of fabric. My hands traced lines down her back, relearning the contours of a woman's body in ways I hadn't in far too long. Every touch carried both guilt and exhilaration. Every sound from her lips was both a reminder of her betrayal and proof of how alive we felt in that moment. I don't need to recount every detail here. What matters is that we crossed the line, fully, irreversibly. The boundaries of marriage, of fidelity, of restraint shattered with each kiss, each touch, each breathless gasp. When it was over, we lay tangled in sheets, the air thick with the scent of sweat and perfume. She rested her head on my chest, her fingers drawing lazy patterns against my skin. Neither of us spoke at first. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," I replied. Because what could she say? That it was a mistake. That she regretted it. We both knew that wasn't true. The truth was simpler, and far more dangerous. We wanted it to happen. And we wanted it to happen again. I left her house that night drenched in rain but burning inside. Every step I took away from her front door felt heavier, as if I were walking with a secret lodged deep in my chest. I should have felt ashamed. And maybe part of me did. But the louder part, the one still buzzing from her touch, felt something else entirely. Alive. That night was not the last. It was only the beginning. And once we had tasted what it felt like to be together, there was no turning back. Looking back now, I know that was the night I chose the path we would walk together. Not her. Me. She may have opened the door, but I was the one who stepped through willingly, knowing full well what it meant. I don't regret it. Not then. Not now. Because the truth is, she didn't just ask me to zip her dress that night. She asked me to undress her soul. And I said yes. If the first night was a storm, then everything that followed was the flood. We didn't plan it that way. At least, that's what I told myself. But the truth is, once we'd crossed that line, there was no going back. Every stolen moment, every whispered conversation, every lie told to cover our tracks, it all became fuel for something that burned hotter each time. I still remember the way she looked the morning after. Not in person. I didn't wake up next to her, no. That was never our arrangement. We weren't reckless enough to risk something so obvious. But she sent me a picture. Nothing explicit, nothing incriminating. Just her in a robe, hair damp from the shower, a coffee cup in hand. The caption was simple, "Still thinking about last night." That was all it took. One message, and I was undone. My entire day became colored by her. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't concentrate in meetings. My body was present, but my mind was with her, replaying the feel of her skin beneath my hands, the sound of her voice when she whispered my name. We began seeing each other more often. Sometimes it was her house, always carefully chosen nights when her husband was away or tied up with business. Other times it was hotels, small, discreet places where we could disappear into anonymity. The first time she booked a hotel, she texted me the room number with no explanation. My heart pounded as I entered the lobby, as though every person there could see the sin written across my face. But when I knocked on the door and she opened it, all that fear melted away. She was wearing a simple dress, not nearly as elegant as the one she'd worn that first night, but somehow even more dangerous. It clung to her curves like it had been sewn with me in mind. "You came," she said softly, a smile tugging at her lips. "Of course," I answered, because how could I not? What followed was a blur of heat and desperation. The anonymity of the hotel made it easier to let go, to give in completely. There were no familiar walls, no memories tied to the space, only us, raw and unrestrained. Each time we met, it grew harder to pretend this was just about physical need. Yes, the physicality was overwhelming, there's no point in lying about that. She was intoxicating, a mix of fire and softness that left me weak. But beneath it all, something deeper began to take root. It was in the way she looked at me after, when we were tangled in sheets, her eyes searching mine like she was trying to memorize every detail. It was in the way she would sigh and rest her head against my chest, as though she belonged there. One night, after one of those encounters, she whispered, "I don't feel invisible with you." Those words hit me harder than anything else she'd said. Invisible, that's what she was in her marriage, I realized. She wasn't unloved, perhaps, but she was unseen. Her husband provided for her, yes. But he didn't see her, not the way I did. Not the way she wanted to be seen. And I, selfishly, reveled in it. Because with me, she wasn't invisible. She was blinding. Of course, with every high came the shadow of risk. Affairs are built on lies, and lies have a way of multiplying. She became skilled at them, at inventing excuses, at slipping away unnoticed. I wasn't much better. I found myself lying to friends, to colleagues, even to myself. But the danger only seemed to fuel us. There was something addictive about knowing we were walking a knife's edge, that discovery could destroy everything. Every kiss tasted sweeter because it wasn't allowed. Every touch carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken rules we shattered. I should have felt guilty. And sometimes I did. Late at night, when I was alone, I would replay everything in my mind and wonder how I had become this man. A shadow lover, a secret, the kind of person I used to judge. But then my phone would buzz with her name, and all that guilt dissolved. One evening, she sent me a message that simply read, "I can't stop thinking about your hands." I nearly drove across the city right then. That was the effect she had on me. One sentence and I was undone, willing to risk everything for another taste. The meetings grew more daring. Sometimes it was quick encounters stolen in the middle of the day. She would tell her husband she was running errands, and instead she would run straight into my arms. One afternoon, she invited me into her car. We parked in a secluded lot, the windows fogging as though even the air couldn't keep our secret. I remember the way she laughed after, her hair a tangled mess, her cheeks flushed. "This is insane," she whispered, breathless. "Yes," I agreed, "but I don't want it to stop." Her eyes softened then, and for a moment, I thought I saw something dangerous there. Not just lust, not just excitement, something deeper, love, perhaps, or the beginnings of it. I didn't dare name it. But I felt it too. There was a rhythm to our affair. Weeks punctuated by longing, by careful planning, by messages sent in coded language. And then, the crescendo, an evening together, explosive and consuming, leaving us both wrung out and sated. And then the silence, the waiting, the hunger returning. It was during one of those silences that I realized something crucial. I didn't just want her body anymore. I wanted her presence, her laugh, the way she would wrinkle her nose when she was amused, the way she would rest her hand lightly on mine, as though it belonged there. I wanted her. That realization terrified me. Because affairs are supposed to be simple, aren't they? Physical, temporary, a distraction. They're not supposed to turn into something that gnaws at you in the quiet hours of the night, something that makes your chest ache when she's not around. But that's what she became for me. An ache I couldn't soothe. A hunger I couldn't quiet. One night, after another hotel meeting, we lay together in the dark, the city lights leaking through the curtains. She traced circles on my chest with her fingertip, her voice soft when she finally spoke. "Do you ever think about what this means?" I knew what she was asking. What it meant for her marriage. What it meant for us. "Yes," I admitted, "but I don't have an answer." She sighed, pressing closer. "Neither do I." We didn't speak of it again that night. Instead, we let our bodies do the talking, drowning out questions with desire. But the truth lingered in the air between us. Questions we didn't want to face. Answers we weren't ready to admit. Looking back, chapter 3 of our story wasn't about the beginning or the end. It was about the escalation. The point where the affair stopped being a spark and became a wildfire. We stopped asking if it was wrong. Of course it was wrong. But by then, the wrongness didn't matter. All that mattered was the hunger, the way we consumed each other, the way we filled the empty spaces in each other's lives. We weren't careful anymore. Not truly. And that carelessness was bound to catch up with us. But in those moments, tangled in each other's arms, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of us. And I wasn't about to let that go. There comes a point in every affair when the high starts carrying shadows with it. The first time, it's pure adrenaline, the rush of touching what isn't yours, of breaking a rule you've never dared break before. Then it becomes hunger, a steady addiction you can't shake. But eventually, the weight of it starts pressing down, even as you keep reaching for more. That's where we were. By the time months had passed, our meetings were no longer scattered flukes, they were part of our rhythm. Her texts punctuated my days, her laughter echoed in my head at night. She wasn't just a woman I was sleeping with. She was the secret pulse of my life. But every pulse carries the risk of being detected. And secrets, no matter how carefully kept, start to fray. The first close call came on a Sunday afternoon. I hadn't planned to see her that day. Sundays, she said, were usually her husband's time: church, brunch, a walk in the park. Safe territory for him to play the devoted spouse. But that week, he'd been called away unexpectedly, and she sent me a message I couldn't ignore: "Come. I need you." Her house was bright with daylight when I arrived, a stark contrast to the dim, shadowed encounters we'd grown used to. There was something more dangerous about being there in the open hours, sunlight pouring through the windows like an unforgiving witness. She pulled me inside quickly, her lips finding mine before the door was even closed. The urgency in her kiss was sharper that day, her hands tugging at me like she was starving. We didn't even make it upstairs. Right there in the living room, with the curtains half drawn and the world just outside, we devoured each other. After, she lay against me on the couch, her chest still rising and falling quickly. Her hair was tangled, her lips swollen. And then, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Her entire body stiffened. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might break them. "He wasn't supposed to be back," she whispered, panic flaring in her eyes. We scrambled, hearts racing, clothes pulled on in a frantic blur. She shoved me toward the back door, her voice low and urgent: "Go. Please, go." I slipped out just as the front door opened, just as her husband's voice carried into the house. My car was parked down the street, and I walked as casually as I could, though sweat was slicking my back, my pulse wild. When I slid behind the wheel, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. For the first time, I felt the true danger of what we were doing, not just the thrill, but the cost if we were caught. But the strangest part, the fear didn't stop me. If anything, it made me want her more. After that day, I told myself I should pull back. I even tried. I ignored her messages for 2 days, convinced I needed distance. On the third night, she showed up at my apartment. I don't know how she got my address, I hadn't given it to her, but she stood there in the hallway, rain soaking her coat, eyes wide and furious. "You can't just disappear on me," she said, her voice shaking. I tried to argue, to tell her it was too risky, that what happened at her house had been a warning. But then she stepped inside, dripping water on my floor, and she kissed me so fiercely it broke down every wall I'd been trying to build. We ended up tangled in my bed, the rain still pounding outside, the world narrowed to just her breath, her skin, her need. After, as she lay pressed against me, her voice was softer, vulnerable. "Don't leave me," she whispered. And I knew then, I couldn't. Even if I wanted to. But with closeness came complication. She began sharing more pieces of herself with me, not just her body, but her thoughts, her disappointments, her secrets. She told me how she and her husband had grown apart, how the silences between them had become unbearable. "He doesn't see me," she said one night, her voice bitter. "He looks at me, but it's like he's looking past me." I didn't tell her the truth. That part of me wondered if she'd ever been enough for him, or if he'd grown too comfortable, too certain she'd always be there. But I saw her, that much I knew. I saw every flicker of desire in her eyes, every curve of her smile. And I told her so. "You're not invisible with me," I whispered, repeating the words she'd once said. Her eyes filled with something dangerous then, something that wasn't just lust. That's when guilt began its slow invasion. Not guilt about betraying her husband, I'd stopped thinking about him, if I'm honest. The guilt came from knowing what she was becoming to me. I hadn't meant to fall. That wasn't supposed to be part of the deal. But each time I saw her, I sank deeper. Each time she looked at me with those eyes that seemed to plead and demand in equal measure, I felt myself belonging to her in ways I couldn't admit out loud. And I knew, if I kept going, this wouldn't just be an affair. It would be something else. Something more consuming. One night, lying in her bed with the clock ticking loudly in the dark, she whispered, "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like if you were mine completely." I didn't answer, because I had thought about it too. And thinking about it was dangerous. The secrecy weighed on me in other ways. Friends started noticing my distraction, the way I disappeared without explanation. At work, I found myself staring at my phone more often than my computer screen, waiting for her name to light up the screen. She became my addiction, and like all addictions, I knew it would cost me. Yet I couldn't stop. There was one moment that still haunts me. We were in a hotel room again, the city glowing outside the window. She was asleep, her head resting on my arm. I should have felt peaceful. Instead, I felt a pang of something sharp, fear, maybe, or longing. Because in that moment, I realized I didn't just want her body. I wanted her life, and that was the most dangerous thought of all. People think affairs end in fire. They imagine screaming, shattered glass, rings thrown across rooms. But ours didn't. Ours ended quietly, like a candle burning down to its final inch of wax. And yet, the flame of it still scorched me in ways I'll never forget. By the time months had blurred into a year, our secret life felt almost natural. The lies rolled off our tongues without hesitation. The thrill of stolen afternoons, of hotel sheets tangled in sweat, had become routine. That's the cruel thing about forbidden love, it stops feeling forbidden once you're inside it. But comfort is dangerous. Comfort breeds carelessness. The second close call came at another friend's gathering, almost a mirror of the night it began. I hadn't expected her to be there, hadn't prepared myself for what it would feel like to see her with her husband at her side. She looked radiant that night, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her laugh floating through the room as though nothing in the world was amiss. To everyone else, they looked like the perfect couple. But when her eyes found mine across the room, I felt that old current jolt through me, sharp and undeniable. We didn't speak much, just polite words shared in a circle of people. But there was a moment, so brief I doubt anyone else saw it, when her hand brushed against mine under the table. Just a graze, a whisper of skin against skin. But it was enough. My body reacted instantly, heart hammering, heat spreading like wildfire. Later that night, she messaged me, "I hate pretending." And I knew then that the weight of secrecy was crushing her too. We tried to hold on to what we had, but cracks began forming. The urgency that once fueled us turned into tension. She wanted more time, more of me. I wanted her, but I couldn't give her what she was starting to crave, permanence. One night in a hotel room, after another round of passion that left us breathless and tangled, she whispered into the dark, "Sometimes I want to tell him. Just so I don't have to hide anymore." My chest tightened. The thought of her confessing, of everything spilling into the open, terrified me. Not because I feared judgment, I'd accepted my sins, but because I knew it would destroy her. "You can't," I said firmly. "It would ruin everything." She turned to me, eyes glistening. "Everything's already ruined." That was the first time I saw the cracks in her resolve. Not because she loved me less, but because she wanted more. And I wasn't sure I could give it. We didn't end that night. Not officially. We kept meeting, kept clinging to the fire even as it burned us. But something shifted. The laughter that once spilled freely between us grew quieter. The silences grew heavier. I began to notice her husband more too, not because I cared for him, but because his shadow lingered over every encounter. The guilt I had kept at bay started seeping in. Sometimes, after she left my apartment, I would sit in the silence and imagine him at home, unaware of the web being spun around him. And still, I didn't stop. The last time we were together wasn't planned. She called me late, her voice trembling, asking if she could come over. When she arrived, her eyes were red, mascara smudged. "He asked me if I was happy," she whispered. I lied. I told him I was. But I'm not. I haven't been for years. After, she lay with her head on my chest, silent for a long time. Then she whispered, "I can't keep doing this." I wanted to argue, to beg her to stay. But I didn't, because I knew she was right. We didn't fight. We didn't scream. We just lay there, our silence saying everything words couldn't. When she left in the morning, she kissed me one last time. Soft, lingering, final. And then she was gone. We never spoke again after that. No messages, no calls, just silence. It's been years now, but the memory hasn't dulled. I can still feel the ghost of her touch, still hear the way she whispered my name in the dark. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks of me too, if she ever looks at her husband across the dinner table and remembers the nights she spent in my arms. But I'll never know, and maybe that's for the best. Why am I telling this story now? Maybe because secrets like this have a way of eating you alive if you don't let them out. Maybe because I want someone, anyone, to know that it happened, even if no one knows who I am, or who she is. She was never caught. Her husband still looks at her as though she belongs only to him. The world still sees her as the faithful wife. And maybe she still is, in some ways. But I know a different version of her. The version that needed to be touched, to be seen, to be loved in ways she wasn't getting at home. I was that man for her. For a time, and though I remain anonymous, though my name is hidden and my face unknown, I'll carry the memory of her forever. Because sometimes, the most unforgettable loves are the ones that can never be claimed. This story began with something as simple as a zipper on a dress. What should have been a harmless moment between two acquaintances turned into the spark of a hidden fire. That touch, that closeness, opened a door neither of us intended to walk through, but once we crossed, there was no turning back. In Chapter 1, the tension of that first encounter set the tone. A single intimate moment, easily dismissed in another life, became the seed of something forbidden. By Chapter 2, secrecy had wrapped itself around us like a second skin, fueling the thrill of every stolen glance and whispered word. The passion was intoxicating, the lies disturbingly easy. By Chapter 3, our affair had become routine, dangerous in its normality. We had carved out a private world, but with every meeting, the weight of what we risked grew heavier. Chapter 4 showed the cracks, her longing for more, my fear of what more would mean, and the undeniable truth that while our bodies were deeply entwined, our lives were not built to merge. And in Chapter 5, we reached the inevitable. Not discovery, not scandal, but silence. We didn't end in flames, we ended in a whisper, two people who had loved each other in the shadows, forced to walk away because the light of reality would have destroyed everything. The conclusion is simple, though the emotions are not. Infidelity is not always about betrayal for betrayal's sake. Sometimes, it's about loneliness, neglect, or a hunger to be seen and touched in ways one no longer is at home. It is both selfish and deeply human. She was never caught. Her marriage remains intact in the eyes of the world. But beneath the surface, there exists a truth that only she and I carry. A truth woven into hotel sheets, late-night whispers, and the sound of a zipper sliding shut before everything changed. What did I learn? That desire doesn't always align with morality. That love can exist in forbidden places, even if it has no future. And that some of the most powerful connections we experience will never belong to us in the light of day. Our story ended quietly, but the memory will live with me forever. Anonymous or not, I carry the weight of what we shared, a reminder that passion, once ignited, is almost impossible to control. Because sometimes, the most unforgettable chapters of our lives are the ones we can never admit to living. This story is a work of fiction inspired by real-life themes of relationships, passion, and infidelity. Any resemblance to actual persons, names, or events is purely coincidental. The content is intended for a mature audience and is shared for entertainment, reflection, and storytelling purposes only. The author does not endorse or encourage infidelity, betrayal, or harmful behavior in any form. Instead, the story seeks to explore the complexity of human emotions, desires, and the consequences of choices made in secrecy. Readers are advised to approach this narrative with discretion and maturity. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. What started as a simple story of a zipper became an intimate confession of passion, secrecy, and the choices that forever changed two people. Stories like this remind us that human desire is complicated, that loneliness can push us into unexpected arms, and that sometimes the most powerful connections are the ones we must keep hidden. I appreciate you taking the time to read and reflect on this story. Your support makes it possible to continue sharing these raw and emotional experiences. Every story told here is a window into a private world, a world many live but few will ever admit out loud. If this story touched you, surprised you, or made you think differently, I encourage you to stay connected. Subscribe, follow, and share so you never miss the next tale of passion, betrayal, and the hidden truths behind closed doors. Once again, thank you for your time, your attention, and your willingness to journey with me through these delicate and forbidden spaces. More stories are coming, and I promise, they will be just as unforgettable.